The spaceship Star Explorer glided silently through the darkness of space. Inside, David Rodriguez pressed his face against the small window, watching as the planet Kepler 440b grew bigger and bigger. This blue and green world would be his home for the next 2 years. David was 28 years old and had dreamed of this moment his entire life. As a xenobiologist, he studied alien life forms, but this was different. This wasn't just about studying plants or tiny creatures. This was about meeting real alien people who could think and talk just like humans. He clutched his most precious possession, a large silver device the size of a briefcase. Everyone on the ship had been curious about it during the 6-month journey. Some thought it contained scientific equipment. Others guessed it held family, photos, or personal items. David always smiled when people asked, but he never told them what was really inside. The truth was simple but amazing. The device held over 50,000 books, stories, poems, and writings from Earth. David had spent 5 years collecting every piece of human literature he could find: Shakespeare, ancient myths, modern novels, children's stories, poetry collections, philosophy books. Everything was there. Other scientists thought David was crazy for bringing so many books to space. They told him he should focus on alien cultures, not human ones. But David had a theory that nobody else believed. He thought that stories reveal the deepest truths about any species. If he wanted to understand aliens, he first needed to understand what made humans special. The Star Explorer docked at the research station orbiting the planet. David grabbed his heavy literature device and stepped out into a world unlike anything he had ever seen. The station was enormous, with curved walls, made of some kind of crystal that changed colors. Soft music played from invisible speakers, but the melody sounded like nothing from Earth. The air smelled like cinnamon mixed with ocean breeze. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human station commander, met David at the airlock. She was a tall woman with gray hair and kind eyes who had been living in space for 15 years. "Welcome to the frontier of human knowledge," she said, shaking David's hand. "Are you ready to meet our alien colleagues?" David's heart pounded with excitement and nervousness. "I've been dreaming about this moment since I was a kid." They walked through corridors filled with strange artwork and alien symbols. Other humans nodded as they passed, but David barely noticed them. He was too focused on the fact that somewhere in this station, actual alien beings were working, thinking, and living their lives. They entered a large circular room with a dome ceiling that showed the stars outside. 3 beings sat around a curved table, and David's breath caught in his throat. The first alien was unlike anything he could have imagined. Her name was Crystal, and she looked like a living sculpture made of transparent blue stone. Light flowed through her body like water, and when she moved, tiny rainbows danced across the walls. She was from a planet called Vega Prime, where all the people were made of living crystal. The second alien introduced himself as Ocean. He had 8 long, flexible arms that moved like tentacles, and his skin changed colors as he spoke. His large, intelligent eyes seemed to see everything at once. He came from a water world near Proxima Centauri, where his people lived in underwater cities. The third alien was the most mysterious. Flash appeared as a glowing ball of light that constantly shifted between different colors. Sometimes the light formed shapes that almost looked like a person, but then it would dissolve back into pure energy. Flash's people lived in the space between stars, traveling through the galaxy as beings of pure thought and energy. "David," Dr. Vasquez said, "meet our research team. They've been waiting to work with a human xenobiologist." David set his heavy literature device on the table and shook hands with each alien. Crystal's hand felt cool and smooth like polished stone. Ocean's tentacle was surprisingly warm and gentle. Flash simply glowed brighter when David reached toward the light, which seemed to be their way of greeting. "What is that large device you carry?" Crystal asked. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "It looks heavy," Ocean added, his colors shifting to curious shades of purple and gold. Flash pulsed with interest. "The energy signature is fascinating. It contains vast amounts of organized information." David smiled, remembering all the times people had asked this same question. It's my research library. I brought some reading material from Earth. How many books? Crystal asked. About 50,000. The room fell completely silent. Crystal's inner light stopped flowing. Ocean's tentacles froze mid-wave. Flash dimmed to almost nothing. Dr. Vasquez stared at David in shock. 50,000? David. That's impossible. Nobody travels with that many books. Why do you need so many stories? Crystal asked, her light beginning to pulse with excitement. David felt embarrassed. These were brilliant alien scientists, and here he was talking about stories like a child. I study how different species tell stories. I think literature shows us who we really are deep inside. Ocean's skin shifted to bright orange, which David would later learn meant intense curiosity. Your species creates many stories, millions. David said quietly, humans have been telling stories for thousands of years. We write about love, adventure, fear, hope, dreams, wars, peace, everything. We experience. Flash suddenly blazed with white light. This is unprecedented. Most species in the galaxy have very small literary traditions. Small how? David asked. Crystal answered, my people have created perhaps 300 works of literature in our entire history. We are considered quite prolific compared to most species. 300? David couldn't hide his surprise. Ocean's people have about 200 traditional stories. Flash continued, my species shares approximately 50 energy pattern narratives. The reptilian empire is around for 100 military epics. Most galactic species have between 50 and 500 total literary works. David looked around the room, realizing that his simple hobby had somehow become incredibly significant. But humans write new stories every day. Thousands of people on Earth are writing books right now. The three aliens exchanged glances, or at least, Crystal and Ocean did, while Flash pulsed in what seemed like agreement. David, Dr. Vasquez said slowly, I think you may have brought something more valuable than any scientific equipment. Crystal leaned forward, her light growing brighter. Would you share some of these human stories with us? We have never encountered a species with such a vast narrative tradition. You really want to hear human stories? David asked. We would be honored, Ocean said, his tentacles swaying with anticipation. Flash glowed warmly. This could be the most important cultural exchange in galactic history. David opened his literature device and scrolled through the massive digital library. Where should he start? Poetry, ancient myths, modern novels? He had stories about every human emotion and experience ever recorded. He looked up at his new alien friends, who were waiting with obvious excitement for the first time since arriving. At the station, David realized that his obsession with collecting human literature might not be crazy after all. Maybe, just maybe, his large collection of stories was exactly what the galaxy had been waiting for. As David selected the first story to share, he had no idea that this moment would change not just his life, but the entire future of interspecies relations across the galaxy. His simple love of reading was about to spark the greatest cultural revolution the universe had ever seen. The adventure was just beginning. 3 days had passed since David first met his alien colleagues, and word about his massive book collection had spread throughout the research station like wildfire. Every morning, he found more alien researchers gathered outside his quarters, all curious about the human who carried 50,000 stories. David decided to start small. He invited Crystal, Ocean, and Flash to his personal quarters for what he called a story session. The room was simple, just a bed, a desk, and some chairs, but David had set up his literature device on a small table, where everyone could see the display screen. What kind of story would you like to hear first? David asked, scrolling through categories on his device. Crystal's inner light pulsed with excitement. We have never had choices before. On Vega Prime, everyone knows all 300 of our stories by heart. Choose something that shows what humans value most, Ocean suggested. His tentacles swaying thoughtfully, Flash glowed brighter. Something that reveals the essence of human nature. David smiled and selected a simple folk tale about a kind farmer who shared his last grain of wheat with a hungry stranger during a harsh winter. As he read aloud, He watched his alien friend's reactions carefully. Crystal's crystalline body began to glow more brightly with each act of kindness in the story. By the time David reached the ending, where the stranger revealed himself to be a magical being who blessed the farmer's fields forever, Crystal was practically blazing with light. The emotional resonance is incredible, Crystal whispered. I can feel the farmer's compassion flowing through my entire structure. We crystalline beings understand logic and beauty, but this story teaches about sacrifice for others. It's magnificent. Ocean's skin had been shifting through dozens of colors. During the reading, on my world, we share resources because our survival depends on it. But this human chose to share when he could have kept everything for himself. This concept of voluntary generosity is fascinating. Flash had been pulsing in different patterns. Throughout the story, the narrative structure contains layers I've never experienced. There's the surface story about wheat and winter, but underneath there are deeper meanings about trust, faith, and the rewards of goodness. David felt a warm pride growing in his chest. That's just one story from thousands of years ago. Would you like to hear something more modern? The three aliens nodded eagerly. So David selected a short science fiction story about humans discovering a new planet. As he read about brave explorers facing unknown dangers to expand human knowledge, he noticed his audience reacting in completely different ways than before. Crystal's light began moving in rapid, excited patterns. This story shows humans actively seeking the unknown. My people only explore when we must. The idea of choosing danger for the sake of discovery is remarkable. Ocean's tentacles danced with animation. The human characters work together as a team, but they maintain individual personalities and ideas. In our underwater cities, we think more as a collective. This balance between cooperation and individuality is intriguing. Flash blazed with sudden understanding. These exploration stories must be why humans travel so far from their homeworld. You tell yourselves tales of adventure to inspire real adventures. Exactly, David said, getting more excited. Stories don't just entertain us, they teach us, inspire us, and help us imagine new possibilities. Word about David's story sessions spread even faster after that first meeting. By the end of the week, aliens from every species on the station were requesting private readings. David found himself booked solid from morning until night. The insect-like hive beings were fascinated by human stories about individual heroes. In their culture, everyone thought and acted as part of a group mind. The concept of one person making independent decisions and taking personal responsibility was completely foreign to them. Tell us more about this Sherlock Holmes, was their spokesperson, a creature that looked like a giant praying mantis with rainbow wings. How does one individual solve mysteries that puzzle entire organizations? The rock-based silicon people were puzzled by human poetry about emotions. Their species communicated through electromagnetic pulses and had never experienced feelings like love or sadness. What is this heartbreak your poets write about? Asked Granite, whose body was literally made of living stone. Hearts are organs that pump blood. How can they break? David spent 2 hours trying to explain metaphors and emotional pain to beings who had never felt either. By the end, Granite's rocky surface was glowing with a warm inner light that his species used to show deep concentration. I think I understand, Granite said slowly. When humans say their heart breaks, they mean their entire being feels damaged by loss. This is poetry, using one thing to describe another thing. The gaseous cloud beings from the nebula sector had the opposite reaction. They were made of swirling mists and energy, existing in a constant state of change. Human stories about permanent relationships and lasting love confused them completely. How can humans promise to love forever? Whispered Mist, whose form shifted constantly as she spoke. Nothing in the universe is permanent. Everything changes. David pulled up a love poem that compared lasting devotion to the eternal burning of stars. As he read it aloud, Mist's swirling patterns slowed and stabilized for the first time since he met her. Beautiful. She sighed, her form taking on golden hues. Your poets understand that even temporary things can feel eternal when they matter. Enough. The most surprising reaction came from the reptilian military officers. David had expected them to enjoy war stories and tales of battle, but instead they were captivated by human stories about friendship and loyalty. Commander Rex, a 7-foot-tall lizard being with silver scales, listened intently as David read The Three Musketeers. When David finished describing how the friends fought side by side against overwhelming odds, Rex's yellow eyes glowed with emotion. In reptilian culture, we fight for duty and honor, Rex said in his deep, rumbling voice. But these humans fight for love of their companions. They risk everything not for glory or orders, but because they care about each other. This makes them more dangerous than any army. Within 2 weeks, David's personal quarters had become too small for the crowds. Dr. Vasquez assigned him the station's main conference room for his daily story sessions. Aliens who had never spoken to each other before were now sitting together, sharing reactions and discussing human literature. The station's AI system began recording every session, creating the first-ever database of interspecies literary analysis. Scientists throughout the galaxy started requesting copies of the recordings, fascinated by how different species interpreted the same stories. David realized something amazing was happening. His simple love of reading was bringing together beings from across the universe. Stories that humans had told for centuries were creating bridges between species that had never understood each other before. But the most incredible moment came at the end of David's second week of story sessions, as he finished reading a poem about the beauty of diversity. Crystal, Ocean, Flash, and dozens of other aliens spontaneously began sharing their own species stories. For the first time in galactic history, beings from different worlds were voluntarily exchanging their most precious cultural treasures. David's large collection hadn't just shocked the alien girls. It had started a revolution that was spreading across the entire galaxy. As David looked around the room at his new friends from distant worlds, all united by their love of stories, he realized his adventure was just beginning. 1 month after David's first story session, the research station had transformed into something nobody could have imagined. What started as a quiet scientific outpost had become the busiest cultural center in the galaxy. Ships arrived daily, bringing alien visitors from worlds David had never even heard of. The station commander, General Torres, was a tough reptilian woman with dark green scales and piercing golden eyes. She had run military operations across 3-star systems and never backed down from a challenge. But managing the chaos that David's stories had created was testing even her legendary patience. Rodriguez, she called, catching David as he hurried between story sessions. "We need to talk." David followed her to the command center, where dozens of screens showed incoming ships from every corner of the galaxy. The station's docking bays were completely full, and more vessels waited in orbit for their turn to visit. "Look at this madness," General Torres said, gesturing at the screens. 3 weeks ago, this station housed 50 researchers. Now we have over 300 aliens from 40 different species, all because of your books. David felt worried. Should I stop the story sessions? I never meant to cause problems. General Torres studied him for a long moment. Then her scaly face broke into what might have been a smile. "Problems, Rodriguez. You've created the most successful diplomatic mission in galactic history. Species that have been enemies for centuries are sitting together listening to human fairy tales." She pointed to one screen showing the main conference room. Inside, David could see beings that looked like walking trees sitting next to creatures made of living metal, all listening intently as Crystal read them a human adventure story. Yesterday, the Bark people and the Iron Folk signed their first peace treaty into 100 years, General Torres continued. They bonded over a story about a wooden boy who wanted to become real. Your literature is doing what 1,000 diplomatic meetings couldn't accomplish. David felt a mix of pride and amazement. I just wanted to share some good stories. Well, you've done that and more. But now we need to figure out how to manage this situation before the station falls apart from overcrowding. The general was right about the overcrowding. The hallways were packed with aliens David had never seen before, floating jellyfish-like. Beings drifted near the ceiling while spider creatures with 8 legs scuttled along the walls. Tall, Thin beings that looked like walking shadows conversed in musical tones with short, round aliens covered in colorful fur. David's story sessions had evolved far beyond simple readings. Different species had started requesting specific types of stories that related to their own cultures. The warrior-like claw people loved human tales of honor and battle. The peaceful flower beings were fascinated by stories about growth and harmony with nature. The most unexpected fans were the ancient void dwellers, mysterious beings from the empty spaces between stars. They rarely interacted with other species, but something about human ghost stories and tales of the supernatural had captured their interest completely. Your species writes about the unknown darkness between worlds, said Shadow, one of the void dwellers who appeared as a shifting black cloud with tiny stars inside. We have lived in that darkness for millions of years, yet your stories understand it better than most beings who claim to study us. But it wasn't just the variety of aliens that was causing chaos. David had started something he never expected. Other species were beginning to share their own stories for the first time in galactic history. The singing birds, who communicated entirely through musical notes, performed epic operas about their ancestors. Migration across the stars. The crystal caves people shared geometric light patterns that told stories of mathematical beauty. Even the usually silent stone giants began carving narrative sculptures that depicted their ancient legends. David found himself not just sharing human stories, but facilitating the greatest cultural exchange the galaxy had ever seen. Species that had never communicated before were finding common ground through shared love of storytelling. The breakthrough moment came during what David now called Story Circle, a daily gathering where different species took turns sharing tales from their homeworlds. On this particular day, a young insect queen named Buzz was struggling to explain why her people found human stories about individual heroes so fascinating. In our hives, we think as one mind, Buzz clicked nervously, her rainbow wings trembling. But these human stories show people making choices alone. It seems scary, but also exciting. An elderly tree person named Oak leaned forward, his bark-like skin creaking softly. On our world, we grow together in forests, sharing nutrients through our roots. But we still dream individual dreams. Perhaps your people have individual thoughts too. Even within your collective mind, Flash, the energy being, pulsed with understanding. Every species balances connection with independence differently. Human stories explore this balance in ways that help us understand ourselves better. David watched in amazement as beings from completely different worlds found ways to relate to each other through stories. The Void Dwellers' tales of cosmic loneliness resonated with the ocean people's stories about the deep, isolated trenches of their water world. The flower beings' growth narratives connected with the metal folks' stories about transformation and change. But the most surprising development came from General Torres herself. Despite her tough military background, she had started attending the evening story sessions. David caught her one night, sitting in the back of the conference room, listening intently as Ocean told an ancient tale about underwater warriors who fought with wisdom instead of weapons. General, David said after the session ended, I didn't know you enjoyed stories. Torres' golden eyes gleamed. On my homeworld, we have always believed that strength comes from conquest, but these stories show strength can also come from understanding, cooperation, and compassion. It's enlightening. She paused, then added quietly, I've been leading military operations for 30 years, Rodriguez. I've seen what happens when species can't understand each other. What you started here could prevent more wars than any army ever could. The station's AI system was working overtime to translate and record every story shared. Dr. Vasquez had requisitioned additional storage systems just to handle the massive amount of cultural data being exchanged daily. We're documenting the birth of true galactic civilization, she told David during one of their regular meetings. Before this, species stayed separate, suspicious of each other. Now they're sharing their deepest cultural treasures willingly. By the end of his second month on the station, David realized his simple plan to study alien cultures had completely backfired, or perhaps succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Instead of learning about aliens, he had taught them about humans. Instead of observing other species, he had brought dozens of species together for the first time. The research station had become a permanent cultural embassy, with David as its unofficial ambassador. His large collection of human stories hadn't just shocked the alien girls who first heard them. It had shocked the entire galaxy into recognizing that different didn't mean enemy, and that understanding could bridge any gap between worlds. Standing in the main conference room one evening, watching beings from 40 different planets sharing stories and laughter, David smiled. His adventure in space had become something he never could have imagined, and the best part was yet to come. 3 months into David's stay at the research station, everything changed when Admiral Kane arrived from the Galactic Council headquarters. She was an impressive human woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes who commanded respect from every species in the galaxy. Her arrival meant something big was about to happen. David sat nervously in the main conference room alongside General Torres, Dr. Vasquez, and representatives from 12 different alien species. Admiral Kane stood at the head of the table, her uniform crisp and her expression serious. "What's happening here," Admiral Kane began, "is unprecedented in galactic history. Dr. Rodriguez's cultural exchange program has achieved more diplomatic progress in 3 months than we've seen in 30 years. Crystal pulsed with pride, her light casting rainbow patterns on the walls. Ocean's tentacles swayed happily, while Flash glowed with warm satisfaction. Therefore, the Admiral continued, the Galactic Council has approved the creation of the first interspecies cultural database. We want to make Dr. Rodriguez's collection the foundation for a permanent galactic library that all species can contribute to and learn from. David's heart raced with excitement. His personal hobby was about to become an official galactic project. But Admiral Kane's next words brought unexpected concern. However, not everyone in the galaxy supports this initiative. A group calling themselves the Purity Alliance believes that sharing cultural materials weakens species identity. They're led by the Void Dwellers extremist faction. David was confused. But Shadow and the other Void Dwellers love our ghost stories. They attend every session. General Torres' scales darken with worry. There are different groups within every species, Rodriguez. The Void Dwellers who visit us are the curious ones. The Purity Alliance represents those who fear change, Admiral. Kane activated a holographic display showing various alien ships gathering near the station. Intelligence reports suggest they're planning to disrupt the cultural exchange program. We need to be prepared. Over the next week, David threw himself into organizing the new Galactic Library project. Working with the station's AI system, he began categorizing not just his human collection, but all the alien stories that had been shared during the past 3 months. The project was enormous. The Singing Birds had contributed over 100 musical story operas. The Tree People had shared growth poems that took hours to perform. The Metal Folk had provided transformation tales told through sculptures that changed shape as the story progressed. David realized he wasn't just creating a library, he was helping birth a new form of art that combined elements from dozens of different species. Human emotional depth mixed with crystalline logical beauty. Ocean dwellers' spatial thinking blended with energy being temporal perspectives. This is incredible, David told Flash one evening as they worked on translation protocols. We're creating stories that no single species could have imagined alone. Flash pulsed with agreement. Your large collection was just the beginning. Now we're writing new chapters together. But their work was interrupted when the station's alarm systems activated. General Torres' voice echoed through the corridors. All personnel to secure stations. Unknown vessels approaching. David rushed to the command center, where screens showed 3 dark ships unlike anything he'd ever seen. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating patches of emptiness in space. Void Dweller ships. General Torres identified grimly, but not the friendly ones we know. A transmission crackled through the communication system. The voice was cold and hollow, like wind through empty caverns. Cultural contamination ends now. Species must remain pure. Return to your separate worlds before we cleanse this station of foreign influence. Admiral Kane stepped forward. "This is Admiral Kane of the Galactic Council. You are in violation of interstellar law. Withdraw immediately." The response was swift and terrifying. The Void Dweller's ships began emitting some kind of energy field that interfered with the station's systems. Lights flickered, artificial gravity fluctuated, and the translation systems started failing. David watched in horror as aliens throughout the station began struggling to communicate. Without the translation systems, the beautiful cultural exchange that had brought everyone together was falling apart. "They're trying to force us back into isolation," Crystal said, her light dim with distress. Ocean's colors shifted to worried purples and grays. "If we can't understand each other, the fear will return." That's when David had an idea. He grabbed his literature device and rushed to the main conference room, where confused aliens were gathering as their universal translators failed. "Listen to me," David called out. "We don't need machines to share stories. We have something more powerful." He began reading one of the most famous human stories, a simple tale about a small creature helping a mighty king, proving that even the weakest can be valuable. As he read, something amazing happened. Even without translation systems, the aliens began to understand. They had heard so many human stories over the past months that they recognized the emotional patterns, the rhythm of narrative, the universal themes that connected all intelligent beings. Crystal's light began to pulse in harmony with David's words. Ocean started changing colors that matched the story's emotional beats. Flash glowed brighter with each act of kindness described. Other aliens joined in, sharing their own versions of similar tales from their homeworlds. The tree people creaked out growth stories about small seeds becoming mighty forests. The singing birds hummed melodies about tiny notes creating beautiful symphonies. The Void Dweller's ship's interference continued, but it no longer mattered. The beings in the station had discovered something the extremists couldn't destroy: the universal language of storytelling that transcended words and technology. Admiral Kane watched in amazement as the cultural exchange continued despite the technical sabotage. "They can disrupt our machines," she said quietly, "but they can't disrupt understanding." General Torres nodded, her golden eyes bright with realization. Rodriguez didn't just bring books to space. He brought proof that all intelligent life shares common dreams and fears. As if sensing their failure, the Void Dweller's ships began to withdraw. Their leader's voice came through the static one final time. "This is not over. Purity will be restored." But as David looked around the conference room at aliens from dozens of worlds sharing stories, without any technological help, he knew the extremists had already lost. The connections formed through shared narratives were stronger than any weapon or interference field. Dr. Vasquez approached David with a tablet showing project updates. "The cultural database is ready for launch. Every species in the galaxy will be able to contribute their stories and learn from others." David smiled, remembering how nervous he had been just a few months ago about sharing his book collection. Now his simple love of reading had created something that would outlast any attempt to divide the galaxy. "What should we call it?" Crystal asked, her light dancing with excitement. David thought for a moment, then grinned. "How about the Universal Story Project? Because that's what this really is, proof that every species in the galaxy has something valuable to share." As the alien ships disappeared into space and normal systems came back online, David realized his greatest adventure was still ahead. The Purity Alliance might have retreated, but they wouldn't give up easily. The real test of galactic unity through storytelling was yet to come. 6 months after David first arrived at the research station, he stood in the newly constructed Galactic Cultural Center, watching representatives from over 100 alien species work together on something that had never existed before. Truly universal stories. The attack by the Purity Alliance extremists had failed, but it taught David and his friends something important. Simply sharing existing stories wasn't enough. They needed to create something new, something that belonged to all species equally. "Today we make history," announced Admiral Kane to the assembled crowd. Beings of every shape, size, and color filled the massive hall. Crystal beings glowed like living rainbows next to towering tree people. Ocean dwellers floated in special water-filled chambers. while energy beings danced through the air as pure light. David felt nervous as he approached the central platform. His simple hobby of collecting human books had somehow led to this moment, the launch of the first collaborative storytelling project in galactic history. When I first brought my book collection to this station, David began, his voice carried by translation systems to every corner of the hall. I thought I was just sharing human stories, but I learned something amazing. Every species in the galaxy tells stories, and when we share them, we discover we're more alike than different. Crystal stepped forward, her crystalline form casting beautiful light patterns across the crowd. Human stories taught us about individual courage, but Crystal people's stories show the beauty of logical harmony. Together, we can create tales that have both heart and wisdom. Ocean joined them on the platform, his tentacles swaying gracefully. In our underwater cities, we tell stories of cooperation and flow, combined with human adventure tales and crystal logic poems. We can create narratives about working together that no single species could imagine alone. Flash materialized as a swirling galaxy of light beside them. Energy beings understand stories about transformation and eternal journeys. When we blend these with solid form species tales of growth and change, we create something magnificent. David smiled at his friends, then addressed the crowd again. Today we're not just sharing our old stories. We're creating new ones together, stories that belong to all of us. The first Universal Story project began with a simple idea, suggested by a young insect queen named Harmony. What if we told a story about different types of beings who must work together to save something precious within ours? The collaborative process was in full swing. The tree people contributed the setting, a garden world, where different species had planted their most beautiful creations. The metal folk added the conflict, a cosmic storm that could destroy all organic and artificial life. Human storytellers provided the emotional heart, characters who cared so deeply about preserving beauty that they would risk everything. The Void Dwellers, including some former Purity Alliance members who had been won over, added the mysterious element, ancient powers that could only be awakened through unity. David watched in amazement as the story took shape. Writers from dozens of species worked in rotating teams, each group adding elements that reflected their unique perspectives, while building on what others had created. The singing birds composed melodies that would accompany different scenes. The crystal beings designed light sculptures to illustrate key moments. The energy beings created shifting patterns that represented the story's emotional journey. But the most incredible part was watching former enemies work side by side. The Claw Warriors, known for their fierce independence, collaborated peacefully with the hive minds they had once battled. Rock people and cloud beings, whose very natures seemed opposite, found ways to combine their stories of permanence and change. "This is impossible," whispered Stone, an ancient being whose species had never trusted anyone outside their own kind. Yet here we are, creating beauty together. General Torres, who had initially worried about the chaos David's books would cause, now served as project coordinator. In 30 years of military service, she told David, "I never saw anything bring beings together like stories do. You've accomplished what generations of diplomats couldn't." The breakthrough moment came during the story's climax, when the diverse characters in their tale had to combine their different abilities to save the garden world. The collaborative writers realized they were describing their own real-life experience. Different species working together to create something beautiful. "We're not just writing a story," said Melody, one of the singing birds. "We're living it." Dr. Vasquez had been documenting the entire process for the official galactic records. "This is more than literature," she reported to Admiral Kane. "It's the birth of a truly galactic civilization based on mutual understanding and shared creativity." As the first Universal story neared completion, something unexpected happened. Representatives from the Purity Alliance requested permission to participate. Shadow, David's old friend who had been caught between both groups, served as their spokesperson. "We were wrong," Shadow admitted, his dark form flickering with what David had learned was embarrassment among Void Dwellers. "We feared that sharing stories would make us lose who we are. Instead, Contributing to these universal stories helps us understand ourselves better. The former extremists brought their own unique element to the collaborative tale, the wisdom that comes from understanding darkness and isolation. Their addition made the story deeper and more complete, showing that even opposition could become cooperation given time and patience. Admiral Kane stood before the assembled crowd as the first universal story was completed. What began as one human's large collection of books has become the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation. The Universal Story Project will continue, with new collaborative tales created monthly, ensuring that every species has a voice in our shared future. David found himself appointed as the first director of the Galactic Cultural Institute. The research station was permanently converted into a center for interspecies storytelling, with David's original literature collection serving as the cornerstone of a library that now contained works from every known intelligent species. 2 years later, David stood in his office, looking out at a sight that still amazed him daily. The station had grown into a small city floating in space, with aliens from across the galaxy coming to share stories, learn from each other, and work on collaborative projects. His desk held reports from similar cultural centers being built throughout the galaxy. The Universal Story Project had inspired the creation of interspecies music, art, theater, and even cuisine. What started with books had blossomed into a complete cultural revolution. Crystal, Ocean, Flash, and dozens of other friends visited regularly, always bringing new stories and ideas. The simple story sessions in David's quarters had evolved into a galactic network of beings who saw differences as opportunities for creative collaboration rather than sources of conflict. Admiral Kane's latest message lay open on David's desk. The Galactic Council reports a 70% decrease in interspecies conflicts since the Cultural Institute launched. Worlds that have been enemies for centuries are now collaborating on art projects. Your large collection of stories didn't just shock a few aliens, it shocked the entire galaxy into realizing we're all part of the same universal story. As David prepared for that evening's story session, now a massive event broadcast to millions of beings across hundreds of worlds, he smiled at the memory of his nervous first day at the station. He had come to space thinking his 50,000 books were just a personal hobby. Instead, his love of stories had proven that no matter how different we might seem on the outside, every intelligent being in the universe shares the same dreams, fears, hopes, and desires. Stories weren't just entertainment. They were the universal language that could unite anyone, anywhere, no matter how far apart their worlds might be. The adventure that began with shocking alien girls had become something even more amazing, proof that understanding and friendship could overcome any barrier in the universe.